August 14, 1953. The alley off 142nd Street in Harlem was darker than usual that night. The streetlights had been shot out 3 days earlier, and nobody had bothered to replace them because in that part of Harlem, darkness meant business. The kind of business the police didn't want to see and the residents didn't want to talk about. At 11:47 p.m., Bumpy Johnson walked into that alley alone. He was 48 years old, dressed in his signature navy blue suit, no tie, gold watch chain hanging from his vest. He'd been meeting with a supplier about moving heroin through the neighborhood, a meeting that was supposed to be routine, a simple handshake and exchange of terms. But the moment Bumpy turned the corner into that alley, he knew something was wrong. The smell hit him first, gun oil, fresh gun oil. Then he heard it, the slight scrape of a shoe against concrete, the sound of someone shifting their weight, trying to stay quiet, but failing. Bumpy's hand moved toward the .38 revolver in his waistband, but before his fingers touched the grip, the first shot rang out. It hit him in the left shoulder, spinning him backward. Then came the second shot, the third, the fourth. They came from 3 different directions, from the fire escape above, from behind a dumpster, from the doorway of an abandoned building. Bumpy went down hard, his back slamming against the brick wall. Blood was already soaking through his shirt, spreading across his chest like spilled ink. He tried to reach for his gun again, but another shot tore through his right hand, shattering bone and tendon. He couldn't hold anything now, couldn't fight back, couldn't run. 3 men stepped out of the shadows. Bumpy recognized all of them. Vincent Gino Esposito, a low-level enforcer for the Genovese family. Marcus Razor Williams, a Harlem street thug who'd been trying to muscle into the numbers racket for 2 years. And James Jimmy Knuckles Calabresi, a hitman from Brooklyn who specialized in making people disappear. Gino walked up first, his .45 still smoking. He looked down at Bumpy with something close to pity. "Nothing personal, Bumpy. Just business. You've been in charge too long. Time for new management." Bumpy tried to speak, but blood filled his mouth. He coughed, spraying red across the pavement. Razor stepped forward, pulling a switchblade from his pocket. The blade clicked open, 8 inches of steel catching what little light filtered into the alley. He knelt down beside Bumpy, grabbed him by the hair and yanked his head back. "This is for my brother," Razor hissed. "You remember him? You remember what you did to him in '49? Bumpy's eyes flickered with recognition, but he couldn't respond, couldn't move. Razor pressed the blade against Bumpy's throat and pulled it across in one savage motion. Blood erupted from the wound, pouring down Bumpy's chest, pooling on the ground beneath him. The 3 men stood there for a moment, watching him bleed out. Jimmy Knuckles fired 3 more shots into Bumpy's chest, just to be sure. Then they walked away, leaving him there in the darkness, in the alley that would become his grave. Except Bumpy Johnson didn't die that night. A dishwasher from a nearby restaurant, a young Puerto Rican kid named Carlos, heard the shots. He waited 10 minutes after the gunman left, then crept into the alley with a flashlight. When he saw Bumpy lying there, he almost ran, almost left him to die because getting involved with Bumpy Johnson, even saving his life, could get you killed. But Carlos's grandmother had always told him that God watches how you treat people when they're at their lowest. So he ran back to the restaurant, called an ambulance, and then disappeared into the night. The ambulance arrived at Harlem Hospital at 12:23 a.m. The doctors who worked on Bumpy that night would later say it was the worst gunshot trauma they'd ever seen. 17 entry wounds. 17. The bullets had torn through his shoulder, his chest, his abdomen, his right hand, his left thigh. One had punctured his lung, another had nicked his liver, a third had lodged itself half an inch from his spine. And then there was the throat wound, a deep lateral slash that had severed his left carotid artery and come within millimeters of killing him instantly. Dr. Samuel Harris, the head surgeon, told the nurses to prepare the death certificate. There's no way he survives this. Even if his heart keeps beating, he'll be brain dead from blood loss. But Bumpy's heart kept beating, his brain kept firing, and somehow, impossibly, he held on. For 3 days, he was in a coma. The nurses whispered that he was already a ghost, that his body just hadn't accepted it yet. But on the 4th day, Bumpy opened his eyes. The first person he saw was Stephanie St. Clair, the queen of Harlem's numbers racket and Bumpy's closest ally. She was sitting in a chair beside his bed, her eyes red from crying, her hands clasped in prayer. When she saw him awake, she gasped, "Bumpy." "You stubborn fool. You're supposed to be dead." Bumpy tried to speak, but his throat was wrapped in bandages, the wound still raw and bleeding beneath the gauze. He could only manage a whisper, barely audible. "Who?" Stephanie leaned closer. "Who did this?" Bumpy nodded. She told him. Gino Esposito, Razor Williams, Jimmy Knuckles. "We've already got people looking for them. They're as good as dead."
Bumpy shook his head, the movement sending pain shooting through his neck. He reached up with his left hand, the only one that still worked, and grabbed Stephanie's wrist. His grip was weak, but his eyes were burning with something fierce, something unstoppable. No. Me. Stephanie stared at him. Bumpy, you can barely move. You've got 17 holes in you, and your throat was cut open. The doctors say you might never walk again, might never talk again. You need to rest. You need to let us handle this. Bumpy's grip tightened. His voice was a rasp, like gravel scraping against metal. No. Me. I do it. Me. Stephanie knew better than to argue with Bumpy Johnson. She'd known him for 20 years, had seen him survive beatings, stabbings, prison, wars with the Italians, wars with the Irish, wars with his own people, and she'd never, not once, seen him back down. She nodded slowly. Okay, Bumpy, you do it, but you need to heal first. Bumpy let go of her wrist and closed his eyes. He didn't sleep. He just lay there, breathing, feeling every bullet hole, every torn muscle, every shattered bone. And he made himself a promise. 7 weeks. That's how long it took. The doctors called it medically extraordinary. Dr. Harris would later write a paper about Bumpy's recovery, though he never used Bumpy's real name, calling him only Patient X. He described how a man with 17 gunshot wounds and a severed carotid artery had not only survived, but had begun walking again within 3 weeks, how he'd regained full use of his left hand and partial use of his right, how the throat wound had healed with minimal scarring, leaving his voice raspy but functional. Physical therapy should have taken 6 months. Bumpy did it in 5 weeks. He refused painkillers after the first 10 days, saying he needed to feel everything, needed to remember what had been done to him. He walked the hospital corridors at night, dragging an IV stand behind him, pushing himself until his legs gave out, then getting back up and walking again. The nurses called him the Ghost because he'd appear in hallways at 3 a.m., silent and limping, his hospital gown soaked with sweat. One nurse asked him why he was pushing so hard. Bumpy looked at her with those cold, unblinking eyes and said, "I've got an appointment to keep." By the end of September, Bumpy was walking without a cane. By early October, he was lifting weights in the hospital gym. And on October 2nd, exactly 7 weeks after he'd been left for dead, Bumpy Johnson walked out of Harlem Hospital. He was thinner, paler, his suit hanging loose on his frame, but he was alive, and he was ready. Stephanie had located all 3 men. Gino was hiding in a safe house in the Bronx. Razor had fled to Philadelphia. Jimmy Knuckles was holed up in a motel in New Jersey. Bumpy's crew was ready to move, ready to drag them back to Harlem and make them pay. But Bumpy had other plans. He told Stephanie to send a message to all 3 men. Tell them I'm alive. Tell them I'm coming. Tell them to meet me in the alley. The same alley. Stephanie thought he was insane. Bumpy, they tried to kill you once. If you walk back into that alley, they'll finish the job. Bumpy smiled, that rare, cold smile that made even his friends nervous. That's what I'm counting on. The message was delivered through intermediaries, through street runners and bar owners, and corrupt cops who still owed Bumpy favors. Within 24 hours, all 3 men had received the same note, handwritten in Bumpy's unmistakable script. October 5, midnight, the alley off 142nd. Come alone, or don't come at all. Gino laughed when he got the message. He's bluffing. No way he's healed. No way he's stupid enough to go back there. But Jimmy Knuckles wasn't so sure. I shot him myself, 3 times in the chest, and they said his throat was cut. If he's alive, if he's really alive, then we need to finish this. Razor agreed. We go, all 3 of us. We put him down for good this time. October 5, 1953. Midnight. The alley off 142nd. The streetlights were still out. The darkness was still absolute. And Bumpy Johnson was already there, waiting. He'd arrived 2 hours early, positioned himself in the same spot where he'd nearly died, his back against the same brick wall. He was wearing the same navy blue suit, cleaned and mended, the same gold watch chain, and in his left hand, he held a sawed-off shotgun. In his right hand, wrapped in bandages but functional enough, he held a .38 revolver. At 11:58 p.m., the 3 men entered the alley. They came from different directions, just like before.
Trying to surround him, trying to trap him. But this time, Bumpy was ready. Gino saw him first, standing there in the shadows like a ghost, like something that refused to stay dead. His voice cracked. "Jesus Christ, you're supposed to be dead!" Bumpy's voice was a rasp, but every word carried. "I was. You killed me. But I came back because I made a promise." Razor stepped forward, his switchblade already in his hand. "You should have stayed dead, old man." Bumpy raised the shotgun. The blast lit up the alley like lightning. Razor's chest exploded, the buckshot tearing through him at point-blank range. He was dead before he hit the ground. Jimmy Knuckles pulled his gun, but Bumpy was faster. 3 shots from the .38, each one finding its mark. Chest, throat, head. Jimmy dropped like a puppet with its strings cut. Gino tried to run. He made it 3 steps before Bumpy's next shotgun blast caught him in the back. He fell forward, screaming, blood pouring from the wound. Bumpy walked over, stood above him, and looked down. Gino was crying, begging. "Please, please, Bumpy. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. We were just following orders. We didn't want to." Bumpy pressed the barrel of the shotgun against Gino's head. "You said it was just business, nothing personal." Gino sobbed. "Please." Bumpy pulled the trigger. The alley went silent. Bumpy stood there for a long moment, the shotgun still smoking, his breath coming in ragged gasps. Pain was shooting through his chest, his shoulder, his throat. Every old wound was screaming at him. But he was alive, and they were dead. He dropped the shotgun, turned, and walked out of the alley. By morning, word had spread through every corner of Harlem, through every Italian social club, every Irish bar, every street corner where men made their living outside the law. Bumpy Johnson had come back from the dead. He'd survived 17 gunshots and a slit throat, and he'd killed every man who tried to murder him in the same alley with his own hands. The message was clear. You can shoot Bumpy Johnson, you can stab him, you can leave him bleeding in an alley, but you cannot kill him, because Bumpy Johnson doesn't die. He just gets even. For the next 15 years, until his death from a heart attack in 1968, nobody tried to kill Bumpy Johnson again. Not the Italians, not the Irish, not rival crews from Harlem, because everyone knew the truth. Bumpy wasn't just a gangster. He wasn't just a crime boss. He was something else entirely. He was unkillable. And that night in the alley off 142nd Street became legend, whispered in back rooms and passed down through generations. The night Bumpy Johnson came back from the dead and proved that some men are too stubborn, too dangerous, too relentless to ever truly die. If this story of survival, revenge, and the man who refused to stay dead inspired you, hit that subscribe button and drop a like. Share this with someone who needs to hear about the ultimate comeback. And let me know in the comments, would you have gone back to that alley? Keep fighting for your crown, and I'll see you in the next one.